The Inspectorate Unit of the authority also conducts institutional audits. I can say there are various types of audits that we conduct. We have what we call annual institutional audits, we have classification audits, and we have learning program audits. These audits are conducted for specific purposes. The annual audit is a statutory requirement. We conduct annual audits every year. The audits are conducted on all the higher education institutions that are registered by the Higher Education Authority, including the public ones, which we actually recognize, and the public ones have got a separate register for public higher education institutions. The annual audit begins by the authority sending out to the institution which is supposed to be audited what we call the audit form or the audit criteria. We do this in the first quarter of every year. When we send out the audit form to the institutions, it's for the purpose that the institutions should be able to self-evaluate themselves using the same audit tool or audit criteria. After they do the self-evaluation or the self-assessment, the institutions send this self-assessment back to the authority, and then at that point when we receive the self-assessment, we are able to schedule the institution for an audit. When we schedule the institutions for the audits, usually now we do the schedule from the second quarter of every year up to the final quarter, which is the fourth quarter, because in the first quarter we expect that institutions do the self-assessments and they send the self-assessment to the authority. When we schedule the institutions, we go on site to go and do the audit itself at the premises of the institution. In the audit, we go there to verify what the institution has attested in their self-assessment. When they give us the self-assessment, they score themselves and they give us certain information that they purport to exist or to be obtaining at the institution. So basically when we go to the institution, we are going to verify this information, but as we verify this information, we have a discussion with the institution itself, because we need to find out if really this information is evidence enough for them to have a particular score, and if really this information has been taking place in the institution. For example, we want to look at the reports from Senate meetings or the minutes from Senate meetings. We look at the council minutes, management minutes. We look at the other academic functions, including the functions of the Board of Studies, Board of Examiners. So we want evidence that meetings have been taking place for these particular organs, academic organs of the institution. So to verify that evidence, we have to be on site, and on top of that, we need to look at the physical infrastructure of the facilities themselves. When we look at the physical infrastructure of the facilities, are they suitable for them to be offering the kind of training that they offer? On top of that, we look at the caliber of the teaching staff that the institution has. Does the institution have the rightly qualified and the rightly experienced teaching staff? So we go into details to look at the CVs of the teaching staff. We also look at the student to teaching staff ratios and the like. We further look at have teaching staff been involved actively in research and in having publications, for example, production of books, and also are they doing enough to produce research output? So we look at all that evidence when we go for an institutional audit. Now, after we are done with an institutional audit, it can take almost a full day, depending on the type of institution. Like right now, we are standing at Kwame Nkrumah. It's quite a huge institution. So for us to conduct an audit of an institution of this size, it may take us even a day and a half. If the evidence that is being presented has to be scrutinized so much. However, when we are done with the entire audit, we agree on the results with the institution, and when we agree on the results with the institution, because it has to be cordial, so we can't just impose the results on the institution or the findings on the institution. So we have to reach a point where we agree these are the findings and these are the shortcomings that we think the institution is having. So in the discussions, as we are discussing with the institution, to reach a consensus, it's a democratic country. We have to be democratic with the processes that we use in quality assurance, because the idea of quality assurance is to ensure that there is continuous improvement. So you want to agree with the institution, so we table the results. When we find that, okay, the institution claims to have, let's say, teaching staff who have PhDs in sufficient quantity, and they are offering programs at master's level, for example, we have to look at the qualifications of the PhDs that they have. And we also look at the other teaching staff who are not having PhDs. Then we'll be able to advise the institution to this ratio is not sufficient for them to offer this level of programs. And the institution has to reach a point where they agree also, because they already know the audit criteria that we are using. Remember, we give them this audit criteria for them to do a self-assessment. So at that point, we are able to agree to say, according to the audit criteria that is here, your ratio is not as good, and we have to agree on the score based on what we have found. Sometimes it could be physical infrastructure. You find they have fewer classrooms, or a library that is not large enough, and they haven't complemented their library with electronic resources. But when you look at the numbers of their students, they are quite high. You'd be able to agree that the physical infrastructure at that point is not really sufficient. So we have to discuss the sufficiency based on the numbers of the students and the capacity of the facilities that they have. At that point, we reach a consensus. Yes, it's sometimes very difficult to reach a consensus, because sometimes institutions would be interested in having a high score. But most of the time, or every time when we are done with the discussions, we reach a point where we agree that the appropriate score is this one, based on the audit criteria, and looking at the ratios of students, teaching staff, study materials, and everything like that, including sporting facilities, accommodation. You would also be able to tell, because if the institution has got too many students and little accommodation infrastructure, and they haven't made the provision for other accommodation facilities, for example, maybe they haven't created the MOUs with facilities outside the institutions, let's say boarding houses, then you wonder why they should let the students to be fending for themselves accommodation-wise. At least they should make a facility where students can go to find accommodation nearby, within the vicinity of the institution. So the main purpose of the audit is actually to be able to monitor progress and the quality improvements that have been made by a higher education institution. Now, this progress, you can only monitor it, and you can only ensure that there's improvement if you give feedback. So what happens is the outcome of the audit itself is that there is what we call recommendations that we give to the institution. These recommendations are based on the findings that we had already discussed maybe with the institution during the audit. They will even be aware by the time they receive this feedback. We give feedback to the institution within a space of about 1 to 2 weeks after we are done with the audit, so that we can give the institution enough time to reflect on our findings before, whilst the findings are fresh in their minds, and start putting in place measures to improve. The other outcome of the audit is that when we give feedback to the institution and give them the recommendations, we always ask that the institution provides the authority with an improvement plan. This is a plan that shows how they are going to improve on the areas that we identified of weakness. So they provide each area or each aspect or each finding. They give us when they would address that finding and how they are going to address it, because we have to keep monitoring the progress on those findings, because we want to ensure that the higher education institution improves or progresses towards meeting our standards or even doing better. So it's mandatory that we audit all the higher education institutions annually. And as the authority, I think we have been able to conduct annual audits from the time when when the Act demanded that we should be conducting annual audits annually. What has happened is that in the past, we used to have universities only. And I think from the time we just had universities, each year we've been able to conduct audits on all the institutions that are on our register. Now we have colleges. We have had quite an extended or an increase in the number of higher education institutions. And this year we have started to audit higher education institutions, and it's our aim and our goal that we should audit all of them by the end of the year. I think we still have quite some good time. This is only the second quarter. I think by the third quarter we should be able to exhaust 100% of the higher education institutions that exist on our register as of 31st March 2024.